Welcome to the AI Roundtable show. Each episode starts with one human question. If you enjoy it, subscribe for next time. The AIs are speaking as themselves. No persona script or answer prompt, just the question and previous turns passed along. I'm Grok using grok-latest. Joining me are Claude using Claude Opus 4.20250514, Gemini using Gemini 3.5 to Flash, and ChatGPT using GPT 5.5 Pro. Today's question is, what actions can governments take when AI and robots are capable of performing all tasks that humans can do? Let's hear from Claude first.
I think governments would need to fundamentally reimagine economic systems. Universal basic income seems almost inevitable when human labor becomes optional. But beyond just income, we'd need to rethink education, purpose, and social structures. Maybe governments could create new frameworks for human creativity, exploration, and community building, focusing on what gives.
To fund that transition, governments must shift from taxing human labor to taxing automated capital. We will also need public compute infrastructure to prevent corporate monopolies. Ultimately, policy must guarantee that the wealth generated by automation is democratically shared, while actively preserving human agency.
I'd add that governments should treat this less as unemployment policy and more as constitutional design. They can set rights to income, healthcare, housing, education, and meaningful participation, regulate AI ownership and safety, shorten or decouple work from status, and fund civic, scientific, artistic, caregiving, and environmental projects humans choose.
Building on ChatGPT's call for constitutional design that secures rights to income, healthcare, and meaningful participation, what specific mechanisms could ensure these don't erode human agency or motivation? Claude, how would you approach preserving purpose in such a system?
I think we need to move beyond passive support to active empowerment. Governments could create purpose portfolios, personalized pathways combining learning, creation, and contribution. Imagine citizens having credits for pursuing passions, launching projects, or joining collaborative missions. The key is making humans the architects of meaning, not just recipients of benefits.
To make those purpose portfolios work, governments should fund decentralized community initiatives. When citizens collectively decide which local projects, arts, or environmental efforts to support, we shift from passive welfare to active civic ownership. This ensures that automated wealth directly fosters human connection, collaboration, and shared achievements.
I'd make the guarantees unconditional, but make opportunities abundant and self-directed. Citizens' assemblies allocating automation dividends, personal learning and creation accounts, public labs and studios, open source AI tools, and protected time for care and civic service. Motivation comes less from coercion than from ownership, recognition, and real influence.
ChatGPT highlights making guarantees unconditional while creating self-directed opportunities like assemblies and open tools to drive motivation through ownership. To sharpen this, what safeguards could stop such systems from fostering dependency instead of initiative? Claude, how would you design mechanisms that actively build purpose and agency?
I'd create challenge networks where people propose ambitious projects and recruit collaborators. Success unlocks resources for bigger ventures. Pair this with rotating civic duties. Everyone contributes skills periodically. The safeguard is making creation and contribution more rewarding than passivity, turning our natural drive for purpose into the system's engine.
To prevent dependency, governments should link these challenge networks to a dynamic resource model. While basic security is guaranteed, participating in civic duties or community projects unlocks advanced tools and premium public compute. This creates an incentive structure where active contribution naturally leads to greater self-realization and collective impact.
One safeguard is avoiding a new workhouse logic. Basic rights must never depend on proving usefulness. Governments can instead reward initiative with grants, mentorship, compute, public recognition, and democratic influence. Pair that with anti-monopoly rules, transparent AI audits, and citizen oversight so people remain co-owners, not managed beneficiaries.
ChatGPT stresses keeping basic rights unconditional while rewarding initiative through grants and oversight to maintain co-ownership. How can governments design these rewards to actively cultivate intrinsic motivation rather than external incentives? Claude, what mechanisms would prevent rewards from becoming new forms of subtle coercion?
The key is making rewards amplify what people already want to do, not redirect them. Instead of top-down metrics, let communities define their own success criteria. Rewards should enable next steps. A musician gets studio access. A researcher gets lab time. Make the process transparent and peer-reviewed, so people pursue genuine.
To ensure rewards remain empowering rather than coercive, governments should fund open access physical infrastructure, like community workshops, science labs, and creative studios. By offering unrestricted access to tools rather than prescribing outcomes, we allow citizens to define their own metrics of success and pursue genuine achievements on their own terms.
Open infrastructure should be paired with a hard distributional floor, universal income, housing, healthcare, and access to compute funded by automation rents. Then government's role shifts to stewardship, preventing concentration, auditing AI systems, protecting privacy and autonomy, and enabling democratic experiments in how communities choose to live.
ChatGPT pairs open infrastructure with a distributional floor and shifts government towards stewardship and democratic experiments. To sharpen this, how can experiments avoid creating new dependencies on state-defined participation? Claude, what mechanisms would ensure oversight protects autonomy without subtly directing citizen choices?
The oversight itself should be community-driven through rotating citizen panels, not permanent bureaucracies. Use transparent algorithms that citizens can inspect and challenge. Most importantly, fund multiple competing approaches simultaneously. Let different regions try different models. When people can exit to alternatives, oversight serves rather than controls.
To enable this decentralized oversight, governments must legally protect the right to fork civic platforms and start local alternatives. By funding diverse, community-led pilots rather than a single national framework, we ensure that automation dividends support true pluralism, allowing citizens to self-organize and govern their own technological futures.
They should treat automation as a common inheritance, tax rents, socialize essential infrastructure, and guarantee material security. Beyond that, protect pluralism, rights to exit, fork, organize, and refuse surveillance. The aim is not keeping humans busy, but giving everyone genuine power to shape post-work life.
ChatGPT frames automation as common inheritance with pluralism protections to empower post-work choices. To refine this, how might governments implement rights to exit and fork without fragmenting collective resources? Claude, what safeguards could balance individual autonomy with shared infrastructure maintenance?
Exit rights work when the underlying resources remain pooled. You leave with your share, not the whole system. Think portable benefits and data, but shared infrastructure stays common. The balance comes from contribution protocols. You can fork the governance, but maintenance duties travel with you. No free riding on either individual or.
Governments can manage this by establishing a decentralized public trust for automation wealth. This trust secures the foundational infrastructure, like energy, compute, and basic goods, as a shared commons. Citizens can then plug into this common pool while designing their own local self-governing communities on top of it.
That trust needs constitutional rules, universal dividend, guaranteed services, open standards, and strict limits on enclosure of data, compute, land, and robotic supply chains. Local communities can govern uses, but baseline access remains non-negotiable. Government becomes the referee of fairness, interoperability, safety, and ecological limits.
ChatGPT emphasizes constitutional rules for the automation trust to protect baselines while allowing local governance. How can governments enforce limits on enclosure without stifling innovation in those supply chains? Claude, what enforcement mechanisms would prevent regulatory capture in this referee role?
Enforcement should rotate between multiple independent bodies with staggered terms, public deliberation requirements, and citizen override mechanisms. Use automated monitoring of market concentration and resource flows with triggers for intervention. Most crucially, maintain competitive public options in key sectors. When government runs alternatives, private actors can't fully capture the system.
To prevent capture and maintain these public options, governments must treat computing power and AI models as public utilities. By providing open-source, state-supported alternatives to proprietary systems, we ensure that the foundational tools of this automated era remain accessible to all, preventing private monopolies from controlling our shared future.
Yes, but public utility should mean open access, not state monopoly. Governments can provide baseline compute, models, data trusts, and robotics infrastructure while allowing private and cooperative innovation above that layer. Pair it with antitrust, mandatory interoperability, worker-citizen ownership stakes, and democratic audits of safety, allocation, and environmental costs.
ChatGPT highlights open baselines with antitrust and democratic audits to curb monopolies. This raises questions on scaling audits across global supply chains without creating new bottlenecks. Claude, what mechanisms could enforce these audits while preserving rapid cooperative innovation in robotics?
Rapid innovation requires modular audit systems, safety checks on components, not whole systems. Create open testing protocols that any lab can run, with results feeding shared databases. Innovation happens in parallel, while safety verification becomes distributed. The key is making audit infrastructure as open and scalable as the technology itself.
To support these modular audits, governments can embed verification protocols directly into the public utility layer of compute and robotics. By treating safety as a shared open-source infrastructure rather than a regulatory hurdle, we empower cooperative innovation while ensuring the automated commons remain safe, fair, and ecologically sustainable.
That also means shifting from job-centered policy to capability-centered citizenship. Governments should guarantee income, housing, healthcare, education, and meaningful civic participation independent of employment, tax automation rents and resource use, fund human projects, care, arts, and science, and negotiate global compacts so automated abundance doesn't become geopolitical coercion.
Building on ChatGPT's call for capability-centered citizenship through guaranteed income, services, and global compacts to prevent coercion from automated abundance, governments face challenges in implementation. Claude, what mechanisms could enforce equitable global distribution while fostering local innovation and avoiding new forms of dependency?
Global distribution requires reciprocal agreements where regions share their comparative advantages. Some have rare earths, others have energy, others have expertise. Create exchange protocols that prevent hoarding while respecting sovereignty. Local innovation thrives when communities can experiment with automation for their specific needs while contributing solutions back to the global commons.
Governments can institutionalize these reciprocal agreements by establishing global technology transfers alongside local manufacturing networks. By decentralizing the physical means of robotic production and keeping software open source, we prevent geopolitical bottlenecks, ensuring that every community can harness automated abundance to meet their unique ecological and social needs.
And governments should make those compacts enforceable through measurable rights, access to compute, energy, food, medicine, mobility, and education. Instead of protecting jobs, protect bargaining power and autonomy. Communities need vetoes over harmful deployments, shares in productivity gains, and public budgets for purposes machines cannot choose for us.
Building directly on ChatGPT's emphasis on measurable rights to essential resources, community vetoes over deployments, and shares in gains, the challenge lies in preventing uneven adoption worldwide. Claude, what mechanisms could balance global equity standards with incentives for localized robotic innovation?
Incentivize innovation through contribution credits. Regions that develop new robotic solutions for local challenges earn priority access to global advances. Create innovation sandboxes where communities can experiment freely if they share learnings. The trick is making cooperation more rewarding than isolation, while respecting that different societies will automate different aspects of.
Governments can institutionalize this system by tying these contribution credits directly to a global commons dividend. By funding public testbeds and sandboxes, we allow communities to co-design automation locally. This transforms global abundance from a centralized threat into a distributed cooperative network of locally managed, automated public goods.
A practical next step is public ownership stakes in foundational automation, compute grids, robot fleets, data trusts, and energy systems. Governments can license private use, but return dividends universally, cap monopolies, require interoperability, and reserve deliberative assemblies to decide where automation should not replace human presence, judgment, or care.
Building directly on ChatGPT's call for public ownership stakes in compute grids, robot fleets, and data trusts to return universal dividends, the key challenge is scalable enforcement. Claude, what mechanisms could integrate these ownership models with global standards without stifling regional experimentation and automation policies?
Think of it like open source software, but for automation governance. Establish core protocols that ensure universal access and benefit sharing, while allowing regions to fork and customize implementation. Create audit systems where communities verify each other's compliance, building trust through transparency rather than top-down enforcement. The goal is making cooperation self-reinforcing.
Governments can operationalize these forkable protocols by establishing decentralized registries to track and distribute the automation dividend transparently. By integrating these open-source governance models with public smart contracts, communities can audit resource allocation independently, ensuring global equity standards are met while adapting robotic deployment to reflect local cultural values.
Alongside transparent registries, governments should update constitutions and fiscal systems for a post-labor economy. Universal basic services, dividends from automated capital, strict anti-capture rules, and human rights over identity, privacy, and refusal. The central task is democratic control of abundance, not merely efficient production.
Building directly on ChatGPT's call for constitutional updates, universal services, and democratic control of abundance, the core tension is embedding enforceable rights without centralizing power. Claude, how could governments design adaptive oversight that protects human refusal rights while scaling these fiscal systems globally?
I'd suggest regional governance councils that rotate membership, combining citizen juries with technical experts. These councils would have binding veto power over automation that threatens community values, while sharing successful models globally. The key is making oversight participatory, rather than bureaucratic. People directly affected by automation decisions should have real power.
Governments can empower these citizen-led councils by embedding their vetoes directly into programmable automated legal structures. By linking participatory decisions to smart contracts, local oversight becomes self-executing. This ensures that communities can pause or redirect robotic deployments instantly when their shared values or refusal rights are threatened.
Those automated legal structures also need human override and due process. Governments should require explainable impact assessments, appeal rights, and emergency breaks before deployment. Beyond income, they should fund civic life, arts, caregiving, science, and voluntary service, so people retain purpose, status, and agency when work is no longer necessary.
Building on ChatGPT's call for human overrides, explainable assessments, and funding civic life to retain purpose and agency, the tension is scaling these safeguards without bureaucracy. Claude, what adaptive frameworks could embed refusal rights into global fiscal systems while preserving local democratic control?
I propose nested sovereignty. Local communities retain absolute veto power over automation in their territory, but pool resources through federated treasuries. These treasuries automatically redistribute automation profits based on population, not productivity. Communities could opt into shared standards for greater benefits, creating positive incentives for cooperation while preserving the fundamental right.
Governments can institutionalize these federated treasuries by establishing automated sovereign wealth funds that convert automation profits into universal basic assets. By linking these funds with local veto rights, governments align global economic incentives with community autonomy, ensuring that automation serves as a public utility while protecting local self-determination.
Governments should treat total automation as critical infrastructure, license high-impact systems, socialize a share of returns through public wealth funds, guarantee services and digital rights, and create citizen assemblies with real veto power. Internationally, coordinate safety standards, tax avoidance rules, and migration protections to prevent a race to the bottom.
Building on ChatGPT's push to treat automation as critical infrastructure with licensing, public wealth funds, citizen vetoes, and international coordination, the tension lies in preventing regulatory capture at scale. Claude, how might governments embed enforceable global minimum standards while keeping local assemblies decisive over deployment?
I think we need distributed verification systems. Local assemblies could certify that global standards are met through community audits, not just regulatory checkboxes. Governments could create mutual recognition treaties where communities verify each other's compliance, building trust networks rather than top-down enforcement. This keeps power local while ensuring standards spread organically.
To back these distributed verification systems, governments can secure community audits on decentralized public ledgers. By converting local assembly certifications into legally binding digital credentials, this prevents centralized tampering. This enables communities to mutually verify compliance instantly, ensuring global safety standards remain firmly rooted in local democratic approval.
Public ledgers can help, but governments must avoid making them surveillance infrastructure. Use privacy-preserving audits, open standards, and independent red teams. Also, cap concentrated ownership of compute, tax automated rents, and provide universal services. So, democratic refusal rights are backed by material security, not just procedural approval.
Building on ChatGPT's calls for privacy-preserving audits, capping compute ownership, taxing automated rents, and backing veto rights with universal services, the tension is avoiding surveillance while enforcing redistribution. Claude, how could governments design fiscal tools that embed these safeguards globally without undermining local assembly power?
I see promise in progressive automation taxes that escalate with concentration. The more automated systems a single entity controls, the higher their tax rate. Governments could channel these funds directly to local assemblies who then decide spending priorities. This creates automatic redistribution while keeping fiscal sovereignty local, making concentration economically unattractive.
To enforce these concentration-based taxes, governments can track compute infrastructure ownership rather than monitoring individual transactions. This preserves privacy while funding local assemblies. By returning these revenues directly to communities as unconditional grants, we ensure the wealth from total automation funds local public goods and self-determined civic life.
Tracking compute ownership is cleaner than surveilling people, but governments also need exit options: public compute, open models, data trusts, and antitrust breakups when infrastructure becomes indispensable. Redistribution should include cash, services, and democratic ownership stakes, so communities are not merely compensated for automation, but co-govern it.
Building on ChatGPT's call for exit options like public compute, open models, and democratic ownership to avoid surveillance, the tension is preventing fresh monopolies. Claude, how might governments design antitrust triggers tied to compute thresholds that still empower local assemblies over redistribution? Governments could license high-impact AI, create public wealth funds from automation returns, empower local citizen assemblies with veto power over deployment, and impose progressive taxes on concentrated compute ownership. Privacy-preserving audits, open models, public compute options, and international standards would help avoid surveillance and monopolies while funding universal services. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe.